One night changed the fate of an empire. 185,000 soldiers gone by dawn. Imagine Jerusalem, its city walls trembling under the shadow of a world power. Imagine a king on his knees, a prophet speaking truth into fear, and a singular, terrifying phrase in Scripture. That night, the angel of the Lord went out and struck down 185,000 in the Assyrian camp. 2 Kings 19:35, Isaiah 37:36. This is the story of Hezekiah, Sennacherib, and the intervention that turned certain defeat into stunned deliverance. Stay with this retelling. We'll move carefully between the biblical account and what history outside the Bible can tell us. If you love deep dives into Bible history, subscribe and hit the bell. There's more to unpack after this story. Hezekiah came to the throne of Judah at a moment of choice. The books of Kings and Chronicles paint him as a reformer. He reopened the temple doors, cleansed the sacred space, and called the people back from idols to the God of Israel. One short but revealing episode shows the kind of purity he sought. He removed the bronze serpent that Moses had made long before. That bronze figure, once a sign of God's mercy, had become an object of worship. Hezekiah destroyed it because the people had begun to worship the sign instead of remembering the God behind it. 2 Kings 18:4. That image, someone restoring the heart of worship while removing stumbling blocks of misplaced devotion, frames Hezekiah's character. He was a king who sought to realign a nation toward faithfulness, not toward the trappings of power. Beyond Judah's borders, a different story was unfolding. The Assyrian Empire under King Sennacherib was on the march. For decades, the Assyrians had been the dominant force in the Near East, battering city after city, deporting populations, and demanding tribute. Sennacherib led campaigns that took fortified towns in Judah, calling out the might of Assyrian siegecraft and the inevitability of conquest. The pressure mounted as he captured one stronghold after another, and Jerusalem stood like an island of hope and fear. Tension reached a boil when Sennacherib sent word to Jerusalem, not simply a demand for surrender, but a calculated message to crush confidence. His envoys delivered a letter full of mockery and certainty. You are no threat. Your God cannot save you. Resistance is futile. The rhetoric was designed to undermine trust in Judah's leadership and in the God of Israel. Sennacherib's taunts were not mere boasting. They were a psychological weapon meant to fracture courage. Hezekiah's human response is the kind recorded for us. The Bible does not depict him as a flawless commander. It shows a king who felt fear and yet turned to God. He tore his clothes, an ancient sign of mourning and humility, and went into the house of the Lord. There, in the holy place, he laid the letter before God. The king's prayer was raw and honest. He reminded God of the promises made to the patriarchs. He pleaded for deliverance, and he begged that God would silence the blasphemies against his name. That petition was not left without a reply. Isaiah the prophet was summoned, and he spoke with authority into the crisis. Isaiah's message was simple and sure. Do not be afraid of the words of the king of Assyria. The Lord will defend Jerusalem and put his will to work against Sennacherib's boast. Isaiah's prophecy included a remarkable assurance and a decisive tone. God would act. As part of the larger witness to God's faithfulness to Hezekiah personally, the narrative of Hezekiah includes a sign of divine favor that had occurred earlier in his life. When Hezekiah had lain ill and prayed, God promised him additional years, and the sign of that promise was given when the shadow on the sundial moved back, a sign recorded in Isaiah 38 and 2 Kings 20. That episode functions in the story as a reminder. God had already shown Hezekiah personal mercy and had confirmed his word with a sign. It bolstered the people's confidence that God remained sovereign over even kings and clocks. The miracle of a reversed shadow is not the same event as the confrontation with the Assyrians, but in the biblical portrait, it testifies to a God who both hears prayer and gives visible assurances when he chooses. He thought victory was certain, but he forgot one thing. What happened next is told plainly and powerfully in the ancient texts. According to 2 Kings 19:35 and Isaiah 37:36, that night the angel of the Lord went out and struck down 185,000 in the Assyrian camp. The phrasing in the Hebrew points to a direct divine act, an angel sent by the Lord who executed judgment upon the hostile army. The morning revealed the result. When the people of Jerusalem rose early, there lay the dead in the enemy's camp. The siege was lifted, Sennacherib withdrew to his own land, and the immediate threat to Jerusalem was broken. Pause for a moment on that sentence. The narrative does not linger on gore or sensational detail. It offers a stark, solemn report. God acted in a decisive way. The wording emphasizes agency. The angel of the Lord went out, and outcome, there lay the dead. The biblical authors present this as an intervention that changed the political and spiritual horizon of Judah in a single night. Scholars and commentators over centuries have read and reread those lines with a mix of wonder and curiosity. Outside the Bible, Assyrian inscriptions give us a different but complementary perspective. The records of Sennacherib, especially the well-known Sennacherib Prism, boast of his campaigns and list cities taken. Those royal annals do not narrate the same miraculous defeat. Rather, they emphasize Assyrian might and, in some accounts, claim subjugation of Judah. These sources come from different vantage points. One, an Israelite record shaped by faith, the other, a royal manifesto shaped by imperial propaganda. Together, they illustrate how ancient peoples remembered and proclaimed events differently. Historians have offered several theories to explain what might have happened to the Assyrian army that very night. Some suggest a sudden outbreak of disease. Others point to panic in the camp that led to slaughter during confusion, and still others propose rare natural phenomena as possible catalysts. These are scholarly suggestions, speculation that attempts to harmonize the biblical report with natural processes. The biblical text itself does not supply a naturalistic mechanism. It attributes the act to divine agency. It is essential to treat those scientific or historical theories as what they are, attempts to explain, not replacements for the witness of Scripture. The core claim of the biblical narrative stands. An act described as the angel of the Lord striking the camp ended the immediate danger. What followed that night was immediate relief and a recalibration of power. Jerusalem breathed. The pressure lifted enough that Sennacherib returned to Nineveh and the campaign against Judah effectively ended. The biblical account records that Sennacherib returned home and remained at Nineveh, and later records from the region tell us that Sennacherib himself would meet a violent end in 681 BC at the hands of his sons. The annals do not link that event to the Assyrian withdrawal from Jerusalem, and there is no reason in the sources to conflate the two as causally identical. In the biblical framing, the decisive act against the camp and the later fate of Sennacherib serve different narrative purposes. One is divine deliverance for Judah, the other is an historical endnote about an empire's king. There is a moral spine to this story that the biblical authors intend readers to see. First, sovereignty belongs to God. Empires rise and fall not solely by military might, but under the hand of a God who rules over nations. The report of an angel intervening underscores that divine authority can overturn human arrogance. Sennacherib's taunts, intended to mock Israel's God and crush a tiny nation's confidence, become empty in the face of a God who will not be mocked. Second, prayer matters. Hezekiah's response was not political maneuvering alone, it was an act of dependence. He humbled himself, sought the sanctuary, and presented his plea before God. The narrative does not shy away from Hezekiah's fear, it honors his vulnerability and his faith. That combination of honest pleading and humble reliance is what the story commends. It is a picture of leadership that recognizes limitation, seeks counsel, Isaiah, and ultimately waits on God. Third, prophetic words can steady the soul. Isaiah's message was not a magic formula, it was a witness to God's character and a call to trust. Prophecy in this account functions as both comfort and confrontation. It comforts those who fear by affirming God's power, and it confronts worldly claims of inevitability by calling people back to trust in the Lord. Finally, the Hezekiah story warns against idolatry and misplaced devotion. The anecdote about the bronze serpent, preserved in the narrative precisely to remind readers of Hezekiah's reforms, is a moral anchor. Nations can be faithful in ritual, yet forget the living God. Hezekiah's reforms were more than religious housekeeping. They were a restoration of proper allegiance and the removal of objects that had been elevated into competitors with the one true God. What does this ancient episode mean for modern readers? It is tempting to draw easy personal applications. Pray and be delivered, or God will smite your enemies. The biblical account resists simplistic moralism. The text invites reflection on divine sovereignty, human humility, the power of corporate and royal intercession, and the role of prophetic voice in times of crisis. It invites awe more than formulaic certainty. Faith in this narrative is not a guarantee of automatic triumph, but a stance of dependence on a God who acts according to his purposes. There is also a sobering reminder about the limits of human certainty. Sennacherib's pride was rooted in the visible instruments of power: chariots, siege engines, seasoned troops. Yet the biblical claim is that such power is ultimately subordinate to God's will. That truth does not license vindictiveness in personal life. Rather, it calls for humility and reverence before the Lord who judges nations and hearts. As we conclude, picture the dawn after that strange, decisive night. The Jerusalemites rose not to gloating, but to a stunned realization. The threat had been removed in a way they did not expect. The city that had been rattled by empire found resolution through prayer, prophecy, and a divine intervention that remains one of the Bible's most dramatic testimonies to God's sovereignty. The ancient inscriptions and the biblical record together provide a textured memory. One side remembers campaigns and lists, the other records God's decisive protection. Both are part of how history and faith intersect in the ancient world. If this account stirred your curiosity, there are rich avenues to explore. Read the chapters in 2 Kings 18 through 19 and Isaiah 37. Compare the Hezekiah narratives in 2 Chronicles 29 through 31, and consult the Sennacherib prism for the Assyrian perspective. Scholars debate details, and many offer thoughtful, measured theories. Always remember to mark those as speculation when comparing them to the plain witness of Scripture. If this story moved you, consider digging deeper with another video where the archaeological and epigraphic evidence around Sennacherib's reign is examined in more detail. For now, take away this simple, sober truth. History remembers both the mighty and the merciful, and sometimes the two meet in a single, unrepeatable night. Reflect on humility, hold fast to prayer, and let that awe guide your steps. If you want to continue exploring the historic evidence behind the Bible's most dramatic rescues, click the video on screen now.